What's up, OUXers? Sophia Prater here. I am the host of the OUX Happy Hour, and last night I totally forgot to hit record until after I gave my intro of Maria. So I'm going to do that now, and then we'll cut to the recording of her speaking live. So I met Maria Garcia as she was getting certified during cohort 4 of the OUX certification program, which was like a year ago now. And I just knew she'd turn out to be a thought leader in this space, combining her impressive experience and really sharp wits with OOUX to create new ideas and new processes. So Maria is Director of Design Architecture at athenahealth, and she is driving the UX strategy for Athena's medical billing product. And if you've ever dealt with any medical billing, which I know we have, it's complicated, right? It's complicated and it's crappy. And she's doing the good work to apply OOUX and a lot of other methodologies to this space at athenahealth to make it more intuitive for everybody that uses that product. She's been at Athena for almost 4 years now, and before that, she was UX lead at Simply Safe. Maria received her bachelor's degree in mind, brain, and behavior from Harvard University and a master's in human factors and information design from Bentley University. So no big deal. So I'm really excited to introduce Maria here, and let's cut over to the recording. All right, enjoy.
Excellent. So thank you all for coming to the happy hour, and thanks, Sophia, for that very nice introduction. I had an opportunity a few weeks ago to have dinner with some certified OUXers and Sophia and Luke in Boston, and it was a really great conversation that helped me figure out what to talk about and what I've been thinking about. So hoping that sharing this information will be helpful for you all too. So Sophia mentioned a lot of this already. I've been in the UX industry, mostly in healthcare. I've been doing this for about 20 years now. I have focused, even though I had the stint with Simply Safe, mostly in the healthcare industry, working with pharma and health insurance and billing software now. My route to user experience was kind of circuitous. I did get the mind brain behavior degree. I thought I wanted to cure cancer, and instead ended up trying to cure people's bad user experiences. Sure. I got my master's in human factors, and I did get my OOUX certification in cohort 4, which is now a year old. So I got it in May of 2021. And while I was getting the OOUX certification, one of the comments that a lot of my coworkers were asking me is, OOUX is all well and good for e-commerce and for more simple websites, but we do healthcare and enterprise software. How can I possibly use OOUX at that scale? So that's really what this past year of playing with OOUX for me has been about. It's really been about trying to understand how we can take this incredibly complex space and work with object-oriented user experience. About athenahealth. So like I said, I've been at athenahealth for almost 4 years. If you haven't heard of athenahealth, what we do is, and we're not Aetna Insurance, we are athenahealth, who does the electronic health records. We've got approximately 145,000 providers using our system to track your medical information, et cetera, in an electronic way. We run about $9.9 billion of annual transactions in our revenue cycle product. And we're serving about 20% of the healthcare population, consuming population in the United States. So athenahealth is a big chunk of our healthcare system at this point. And as Sophia mentioned, my focus right now is really on this revenue cycle services space. So medical billing, it sucks. We all know it sucks. And it's a really complex space that starts with you, the patient, and the provider. But that's not all that goes into medical billing. It's not just that transaction of seeing a provider. You have their facility fees, or where their practice is located, or possibly other labs and things. Then you also have insurance companies involved in the mix. And then something you might not realize, but is also very prevalent, is insurance companies are outsourcing some of their billing to third-party administrators. And then we have a ton of records and documents and labs and orders, results, explanations of benefits, EOBs, claims. So much what used to be paper is now a lot of electronic transactions, but honestly, still a lot of paper and a lot of faxes go back and forth in the healthcare world. We have state and federal regulations, as we all know, impacting everything in the medical system in some way or another. So we have to keep up to date on those regulations. Anything heading Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, is going to be really important in the medical billing space, not to mention a lot of other things going on right now. And we have the payments going through and how we process those payments. A fun little fact is that we have a facility up in Maine that is where all the mail is processed for all of our clients. And you get paper checks that get sent there. And part of the process is to figure out where that paper check, who that paper check belongs to. So it's a big paper processing facility in our main office, which I've gotten to visit pre-pandemic and was really, really cool. So my first approach after getting the certification was do a little side project of trying to catalog all of the objects that I could think of, with a few other people sort of helping me along, of the major objects. Let's just go for the most important objects. We're not going to go for the less important objects. And just from that brainstorming, I got 32 objects that were really important that I couldn't ignore in some way or another. What I realized is that a lot of them were parent-child sort of multi-generational relationships. So, and then not only that, but lots of relationships that were sort of generational local objects. So a claim would be related to a charge. And so you can't really have a charge without a claim. But the charge, as you can see from my little network graph right here, the charge is deeply connected to other things in the system. So you have this sense of local objects that gain some importance depending on what context you're viewing them in and how you're using them. And then another clear thing that came out of this exercise of trying to like social network map all of these objects was that there are some of these that have very clearly defined processes, while a few of them are the underlying triggers or the underlying data objects that will have a lot of influence on these defined processes. So Danny Norton, who's also an OOUX certified person who works with me, Danny Norton and I sat down one day and came up with two concepts of origin objects and work objects. The origin object is the patient, the provider, the practice, the payer in our case. So they're the core data elements that are used in our system to, but they're not having workflows of their own. So they create a lot of work. The patient has a bunch of things that the patient will have to do. So they will have claims. The provider has credentials that they need to have filled out. The practice has a bunch of processes they need to follow. The payer obviously has a ton of processes they need to follow. So that versus our work objects, which are artifacts that contain references to these origin objects, but they do have business processes of their own. So examples of these in medical healthcare are things like orders, lab results, EOBs, claims, and in my world, payments, hugely important. Okay, so great. you got these origin objects, you got these work objects. How do you deal with this idea of a business process? And what I went through was thinking about how the origin objects are feeding into one of these work object instances. This is going to be the instance because we also have the idea of work objects as a whole. So the origin objects are feeding into these work objects. Each of these work objects have a business process, and I will go through what a business process really means in later slides. But business processes at a high level contain activities. And the reason I have the activity in gray is that it's a backend structure. The user never actually sees the activity because what they're going to see is either the fact that maybe something automated happens before they actually get their own atomic task that they need to complete. Business processes are what will potentially lead to a work object having phases, states. We're still debating on what to name these things. And the other important thing to realize is that an activity can lead to new work objects. So you could have sort of children spawning off of this work object based off of where you are in the business process. So it can get really complicated very quickly. For the purposes of object mapping, don't worry about mapping everything in the origin objects. That's going to drive you absolutely bonkers. I have had people talk to me about, oh, well, can you tell me everything that's in pair? No. That is, I mean, we've had people trying to analyze pair for years, and there's so much data associated with that. So the question I come back to is always, what is the job to be done that you're trying to solve for? So narrow the scope of the objects to just the problem that you're trying to solve for. Narrow that problem to a role in the system. So I see a lot of this happening in object maps that I've reviewed, and I've done it myself. People trying to do the admin type configuration work at the same time they're trying to create the object map for a front end user. Those are two different spaces, two different object maps, because your lens on these objects is going to be different. In the end, the objects will have overlapping metadata, et cetera. But if you're really trying to do this for the purposes of narrowing your scope and figuring out your design, it's important to not blow it up too quickly. So this is how we've been sort of narrowing scope. And if you're working with a work object, something that has a business process, make sure to map out that process. And when I say business process, turns out there's a really great tool that has been created called BPMN. And what it's doing is that process improvement is something that's long existed in the world. And it's identifying, analyzing, and improving existing business processes to optimize performance and meet best practices or simply improve the quality of the user experience. So why all UXers aren't going out and learning about BPMN is beyond me. I think it should be fundamental to part of your UX education to truly understand how to use, how to map business process well. So BPMN is a common notation method, business process model notation, and it has a defined sequence of activities. This is when you use it. The sequence of those activities seldom changes. So you can have branching, you can have different paths along those branches, but the sequence isn't going to be completely random at any point. It's predictable, repeatable. The activities are linked to one another, and the activities can be partially or fully automated at times. So you can map any sort of business process in BPMN, but it's really thinking through how you're going to get efficiency in your process and how you're going to communicate that across the organization to your users, etc. The other thing we're using a lot of at Athena is DMN, which is decision model notation. This is hugely complex for the medical space because it's defining rules around how to make decisions. So it's codifiable business logic that's readable by business users. This is important. Your developers should not be in charge of the rules for how a claim gets billed from United Healthcare when it contains a certain diagnosis code. That's not what the developers do. We have people at Athena who have that knowledge and can keep up to date with the latest CMS standards and with the government regulations around things, et cetera. So really important to have decision modeling as part of how you route information and how you create your business processes. And it is often used in conjunction with BPMN. So just a quick shout out to why you want to do this. It is a very powerful common language for communicating process, and it gives you the ability to translate something into something machine readable. So your developers can take this BPMN and DMN and actually build executable things off of it. So it's really cool. Little quick example of a BPMN. Let's say you decide you need cake. You have 3 steps in this process, 3 tasks that you need to complete. You need to obtain your ingredients, you mix your ingredients, you bake your cake, and then finally you enjoy your cake. In terms of the elements that you can see in a BPMN, we have flow objects, which are events, activities, and gateways. And I'll go into the more specifics in subsequent slides. You have connecting objects, which is how your messages and how the sequence flows. You have swim lanes, which are really the groups, and if you ever do any kind of sort of user journey mapping, a lot of us UXers are really familiar with these concepts of like, okay, so this is this role who does this function, and then this is this role. So those are your swim lanes. And you have artifacts, which for our purposes are not as important. Okay, so your events. These are something that happens during the course of a process. So 3 types of events. The most common that you'll always have in your BPMN is a start event. And this is incredibly important as I've had my discussions about work objects. What is the trigger to create the work in the system, to start this business process? So that there is your start event. Then you have your end event. So what makes this process be considered done? When do you know that you're finished processing a claim? When do you know that you're finished processing an appointment? How do you define that end event? And then you can have intermediate events between those states. Then you have activities. This is where you can have your user tasks, like things that the user will actually see in the UI that they need to complete. You'll have your script tasks, which are automated, and you can also have, and this is where it gets kind of complicated, sub-processes. So your workflow can then generate other workflows. So this is where I talked a little bit about, so maybe your original work object is then spawning off 10 other work objects that each have their own process. So you can have sub-processes within a root process. Another thing to keep in mind is that your activities can have a lot of granularity, and that's one of the things you need to consider when you're creating your business process. So my business process of making cake here, in it, I could say, obtain ingredients is my task, but maybe that's not really my task. Maybe I have a lot of other tasks within obtain ingredients. I have to write a list, go to the store, check out, and then finally return home. So what are you going to display to the user as a task? How are you going to define that is an incredibly important part of defining your task object. I'm going to breeze through this kind of quickly. You should definitely read Google BPMN guidelines. There's lots of tutorials on this, but you have lots of different gateways that you can put into your BPMNs, and they're really talking about if exclusive is one of the more common exclusive in parallel. So let's say you need to branch in your BPMN to, let's say, if yes, go this way, if no, go that way. You'll go on an exclusive. If it's I want to make cake and ice cream, then you might have to go through a parallel process for making cake, making ice cream, etc. You have your little arrows that point through to activities. I won't really go into detail of that. And as I mentioned, you have your pools. So the pool is an organization or a company usually, and you have your lanes, which are usually departments or people, roles in a company. Come on, next slide. So here's like a little quick example on pizza ordering as a BPMN. So let's say you're a customer who's hungry for pizza. You go online, you select your pizza, you order the pizza. Now that sends a message to the pizza vendor they receive the message, and they have to decide, and they have to, at this point, start baking the pizza. Now, let's say you have a problem here and pizza isn't coming. It's been 60 minutes and you need to say, where the heck is my pizza? That will send a message where I need to calm the customer down and have them wait a little longer. Or I'm just baking the pizza. Eventually I deliver the pizza, I receive my payment, and that part of the process is done. And as the customer, I pay for the pizza, I eat the pizza, and now I'm no longer hungry. Okay, great. Went really deep into BPMN. So what? How does that relate to OOUX? And what I've done here is I've thought through this idea of how your origin objects are feeding into a claim in this case. So I'm illustrating the claim as this bounding box right here. And then I have processes that occur on the claim, which are these sort of seafoam green boxes here. So what happens is you have to scrub the claim and create the claim, and then you have to wait for remittance. So you have to wait for the payer to say, yes, we received the claim and we will be paying X amount on it. If you don't, there's a whole follow-up process, which has its own actual work objects here. That I won't go into. But the other option is that, yes, you get payment. That is coming in on what is called an EOB, an explanation of benefits, or an ERA, electronic remittance advice. There is a whole process on this object of electronic remittance advice. I mean, we should really call this remittance. And it's complicated. There's a bunch of rules about how the money should be posted if there's a denial or whatever. So coming out of that process, we have to decide, is there a problem? Was there a problem with the claim? If yes, we have a ton of rules around how to properly route that claim for correct resolution. And so there is an idea of having a sub object, sort of a local object of the claim called the claim issue. And a claim can have 0 to many, but once it's in this 1 to many claim issues. So you need to think through at this process, at this point, how am I going to go through all the processes that a claim needs to fix that issue? And it very well might involve kicking off new objects. Like if we have a ticket, which is some kind of error in performing the work on behalf of our clients, or if we have a problem with something we call enrollment, what is the process that we follow at Athena to fix that enrollment problem? What is the process that we follow to fix one of these tickets? And you're going to wait to see, once all these issues are resolved and your claim issue is resolved and all of the potential claim issues are resolved, you have to perform a check to say, yes, if the issues are resolved, I can check if it's closed or if I have to create another claim for another payer, or I can say, no, now I have to go in for a different claim issue based, even though I've fixed one problem, another one still exists on this claim. So as you can see here, the important concept that I'm trying to communicate with this diagram is that objects and processes are actually deeply intertwined, and how we think of the process is going to be really important in how we think of these work objects. So now on to something sort of different, and thinking through how the elements of a page relate to some of these object concepts. So as we all know, in our design systems, we have atoms, which are your buttons, your check boxes, etc. Then we have our molecules, our multi-select, our single select radio buttons, those sorts of things. Then we have our organisms and components. It depends who you talk to, what they call it. We've been sort of calling them components at Athena. So it's a collection of molecules and atoms that create an interface. So you have your form, you have your grid. They're much more put together UIs. Then we introduced this idea of a complex component at Athena, which is something that has a specific use case in mind, but it has a generic implementation. So it has common interaction patterns, but it must be customizable. So what I've been alluding to with all this talk about work objects and work management, et cetera, is that we have a work management problem fundamentally at Athena. You could think of it as a claim problem, authorization problem, et cetera. Yes, those are all valid problems, but there is a not even simple, but there is a basic overlapping work management need of, I need to tell my user that they have some tasks open. They need to be able to find those tasks, filter those tasks, understand which is most important. So there is a set of overlapping jobs to be done that we should have some commonality in how we deal with those problems in the application. And unfortunately, we don't right now. Then more specifically, really getting into some of the more exciting OUX ideas, is micro front end, what we're calling micro front end. I need to come up with a better name for this. It solves a specific problem. So the idea is that a developer will be able to pick up a micro front end. I don't think my example here is very good, plus it's a little too techy to healthcare. But the idea is that a developer will be able to pick up a micro front end, and it will be a card that displays the header information of a claim consistently. And we don't have to have the developer rewrite that code every single time, nor do we have to have the designer say, I have a claim here. What is the most important information I need to show when I am in a table view for a claim? What is the most important information I need to show when I am looking at an authorization and the claim needs to be related? So these micro front ends would have common layouts and designs and code that will allow us to rapidly develop new front ends. And finally, have your page templates. So page templates will be where you put all of these modules, molecules, atoms, etc. But they give you that consistency, and thinking really much in terms of a layout system for your elements. And then finally, you have your actual pages. And honestly, what we're trying to do is move away from the traditional page and trying to push a lot more on this idea of you are designing this module on the page, just this. You're not designing the entire page necessarily. You are really focusing on this graph or this list, which happens to be a list of work objects. If you're displaying this list of work objects, what is the content that you need to display consistently for that list of work objects? Okay, so we haven't actually totally done this, but we're on our way to doing this. We have a pattern library. We have a development team that is building out our pattern library. They're a central team. They are responsible for your atoms, your molecules, and your organisms. And then we have, as I said at the beginning, Athena has sort of three major groups that are products, and there are actually two major ones that are products. We have a group that is working on the electronic health record portion, and we have collector working on the medical billing. And what collector is doing is we have created a product-specific, collector-specific repository where we have a team, a frameworks team, that is creating the more complex components, thinking through what will be useful in terms of an interaction pattern across all of collector. And then we're getting our Scrum teams to think through how do we break down our objects, our components, into these small reusable widgets that can be put into our pages. And then page templates is still, I mean, we're going to probably have them be on the central team, but we really haven't gotten quite to the page template level yet. Some debate about how we can do that. Okay. So started talking a little bit about this, but what is this widget-based architecture? And thinking through if you are OUX certified, if you're not, of course you should go get OUX certified. But there's a worksheet that you fill out, and it's part of the OUX process, the CDL sheet, the card detail list sheet. And I'm proposing that we should have an amendment for complicated cases where you might have a data display. And some of the questions that you should fill out when you're thinking through how to display this data is, do you need calculated metadata for the purposes of data display? What relationships are going to be important? Is it a relationship between two objects? Is it a relationship to time? How fresh does the data need to be? That's extremely important to the developers. Is it okay if it refreshes once a night? Is it you need to have it refreshed every minute? Can the user refresh this data? Do all of the list view filters apply to this chart? Can you navigate to the objects directly from this chart? Are you navigating to list views of objects from the chart? And the simple, what chart type? Is it really a bar graph, a line graph? What would best illustrate the data that you're trying to display? Okay, and so how does this translate into navigation? Simplest case, we have this idea of a home page that has maybe role-specific widgets around the jobs that the specific role in your system is trying to complete. They drill into your object hubs, which are specific around your work object or potentially your origin object. They will show all of the related objects in them. They could have their local objects, their children, it would be a way to centralize all of that information. And honestly, we're doing that incredibly poorly in Athena right now. And then you could drill into the list view of a work object, say. And a work object could maybe have some sub things in it, like tasks. And then you can get into your task list, should you so choose. And then you can get into your task completion page. That's if you decide to drill in a very sequential kind of way. But the beauty of having thought through it in an OOUX manner and thinking through the interaction patterns of each of these widgets is that maybe from the home page, I decide to skip directly to my task list view. And then for my task list view, I decide, no, I actually really want to go back to my home page and think about my work objects that are in here. And for my work objects, I think, oh, no, I really want to get the overview of this work object. So I want to go to my object hub. And from my object hub, I'm easily directed to my task completion. So as you're creating these and as you're mapping the objects and putting everything together, you aren't losing connections between them. And that's why the OOUX is so incredibly powerful in these things. One step further, a little more radical, not totally sure that we're going to get there, but one proposal I have put on the table is going to an object-based architecture that has an origin object navigation. So from your homepage, you would be able to navigate easily to your patient overview. And from your patient overview, maybe you can see the instance of John Doe's record, which might have John Doe's insurance information, his appointments that are upcoming, and the claims that John Doe has pending. Both of these views are incredibly important depending on the job to be done and the role in the system. So that's really it. I forgot my thank you slide. But I'm happy to take any questions in these last few minutes that we've got here.
Oh, thank you so much, Maria. We do have some questions that I've been collecting from the chat, but that was awesome. Feel free to put your applause in the chat with gibberish. That's what I like to do. But yeah, that was you just threw a whole lot at us. I was just saying in the chat, I'm definitely going to want to rewatch that. Yeah, it was very, very exciting to see what you're doing. And yeah, that was just jam-packed. So I'm going to jump into some of these. Yeah, it was a lot in a good way.
It was a lot.
You want your presentation to be one that people are like, I need to rewatch that and let that sink in and take more notes.
Okay, I'm going to stop my share.
Yeah, stop your share so we can see everybody. I think I have you on spotlight, but I can remove the spotlight and there we go. Now we got a good grid view. Cool. So easy question. Hopefully easy question from Richard. What tool did you use for that network graphic that you had in the beginning?
Oh, the network graphic. It was it's a pain to use. It's called Gephi. And it's an open source social network graphing tool. Gephi. Gephi.
All right.
No, Gephi. Gephi. Yes. Yeah,
there we go. Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, somebody who doesn't do letters and is dyslexic. Cool. Awesome. So it's a pain to use though, but that was really cool to like see.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt that like you can almost see like we had this whole round of object prioritization, but when you do the nested object matrix and you see an object that's just like connected to everything else, you're like, oh, like that's an important object versus seeing an object that's not as connected. Like you think it's important and then you're realizing like it's actually not as interconnected as we thought it was. So you can kind of see that in a nested object matrix. The OOUX tool that we'll build one day, you'll be able to take the nested object matrix and change the view to that view.
Yes. I mean, that would be my ideal, is that honestly, Gephi it's a social network analysis tool. The only reason that I know how to use it a little bit was because I did social network analysis as one of my jobs fresh out of college. So Yeah, but it's not fun. I mean, and it's been years, so it takes me a while to understand how to use it. But the way I did feed the data into Gephi was by putting it all into, you won't be surprised, Airtable, so that I could create those relationships and then feed the CSV into Gephi.
Yeah, your happy hour next year needs to be on Airtable.
Yeah, me and Danny.
I'll give you a year before I start
Okay.
hounding you about that. That was the original idea for this meetup was
I think
Airtable,
it was.
but yeah, you had so much other good stuff. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for that. That's a good idea. I'm gonna put that into my dream list for the OOUX software that will one day happen. So other easy question, Katie, and I think everybody is wondering if we can have your slides.
Sure. Let me clean them up a little bit because I realized that I put Athena-esque like stuff in them. So yeah.
I think especially those the business process ones, the ones that maybe are not. Yeah, if you could send us even a subset of your slides, I will. I'll get those.
Yeah, out. No. Even I mean, nothing was like. But I think for clarity of understanding too, I'll clean up kind of some of my Athena language that I realized as I was going through is Athena language. But yes,
okay. I mean, I think that don't spend much time on it. I think we're pretty happy with it, unless it's like a legal thing.
Yeah, no.
So Danielle was asking, do you actually create different drawings, different business process models for each user or persona or mindset? Did you?
No. So the business process should be consistent. And when you are creating the business process, you can put the swim lanes that have the different people. So if you have 3 different roles, like what is each person doing in that business process?
Okay.
What you do get different business processes is around different work objects.
But you're not mapping like this persona is more likely to take this route versus
no.
Route or anything
the beauty of the business process is that as people, like, if you do this right in a beautiful world and your devs execute on it, there is software out there that will show you what path people are taking through these business processes, and it will actually show you, oh, this is the most common branch that people take.
Interesting. Oh my gosh, you can see like people tooting along the
exactly.
process. Little emojis going around. That'd be cute. Danielle, did you have any follow-up to that answer? Feel free to go off mute, Danielle. That was an interesting question. Okay, seems like she's good. So there was some talk in the chat on the difference, and Joy, I'll get to your question in a second, on the difference between a service blueprint and business process modeling. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Danny and I actually talked a lot about that. So service blueprint, I would say it's a lot more about, there's a little bit more UX feel sort of things to it. Like person is really frustrated, person is, which business process model will not take. There's not frustration points, pain points. The business process is supposed to be the process that you're going to follow. The other thing about a sort of service blueprint is that you're often trying to track a lot of offline tasks. And the business process model should really be about the tasks that are being done in the system in some way. If there's an offline task, you could put it in there, but there's really no purpose. Like, what is the UI that the user is going to be interacting with at that point? Otherwise, you're just waiting for something to happen outside the system.
That makes sense. So do you think you would maybe start with a service blueprint and then pull?
Yeah, I think it depends, again, Zoom level, right? Like, are you thinking about a full new product where you're going to have services support and like all these other things outside of the business process? Or are you just really trying to figure out how the heck are we going to get somebody to finish this work in the system?
Got it. Okay, so Joey has a question. Joey, if you're still here, do you want to just come off mute and ask your question? Instead of me reading it. Joey.
Hi. Yeah.
Hi.
So I was wondering, because you have all these different like components that you're building out with this hierarchy that's kind of customized for each type of role and what they need to do. Do you have your teams organized so that they're kind of dedicated to each type of role and like researching their different needs, or how are your teams organized for this? No?
So right now, the way our teams are organized is very much based off of, it's really business process based. So like, where are you in the life cycle of the healthcare process? In the claim, in the whatever. I would love, and I've been sort of gently promoting the idea of our teams being organized around the objects, actually.
Yeah.
And actually having, or at very least, I mean, like the baby step I want to take is having subject matter experts and design matter experts around each object, so that you know if you're going to impact patient, that person is who you go to that's orchestrating all of the work happening on patient.
Yeah. So
But
this is something like I've been pushing for a while, and I was working with Autodesk last week, and they have also is anybody from Autodesk here? I was telling them to come because I was like, Athena has hundreds of objects too, and you also have hundreds of objects. You guys should hang out, even though it's totally different industry. But we were talking about layers. There was a lot of conversation about like, okay, like objects start to kind of congregate together. Maybe it's around business process, but we were seeing like there's all these objects on bill of materials. There's all these objects around communication. Then there's like the core set of objects. Then there's objects on like, revisions and versions and alternate designs, like all these kind of like branchings of the 3D model. And we were like, well, how cool would it be if you had here, and I'm going to try to like paint a picture, and I know we're right at time here. So if you have another meeting, if you're a West Coaster, it's about 4 o'clock, you might have another meeting. But what we were looking at is like, if you had a nested object matrix, so OUXers, stay with me here, and you've got your objects kind of like grouped together along your matrix. So you have like your core objects, and then maybe you have your bill of materials, or if it might be different for Athena, you might have your origin objects, and then you might have your billing objects, and then you might have your like diagnosis objects or something like that. All these objects kind of congregate together. And then if you build your teams around that nested object matrix shows you where your teams need to communicate. So you can see like, okay, here's the intersection. Here's how I'm drawing the nested object matrix with my hands here. But like, here's how the billing objects and the core and the origin objects or core objects intersect. This is where we need to have conversations. And
that's actually
map it out. It's like a different org chart, basically.
That's what I wanted to get to. If we could ever finish that social network graph of objects, is that you would be able to highlight a node and see all of the connections, which is why I think it's actually really important to get the objects and get people contributing the object maps into a centralized location, so that you have common metadata, common core content, common objects, and then you're not starting from scratch every time you're doing an object map. And you have all the relationships that are surfacing from our, 2,000 people working on this.
Oh my gosh, 2,000 people. Elena, did you have a follow-up question to that?
I think that answered it when you answered Joey's question. I was wondering about the complex components, if you divided those out by like roles for the people who were designing it.
So, yeah, we haven't gotten quite. Sophia and I were actually debating this when we had dinner. Like, is there a place where you want a role to have different versions of a component based off of what they need to do? I have a hypothesis that yes, Sophia was very uncomfortable with that because
No.
of shape shifting potential.
But it's that I will say yes, like I know that you might need different components for different roles for sure. It's just how similar can you possibly make them? And just going to the shape shifting, just remembering like you have a budget for shape shifting and you just want to make sure that like every shape shift that you do, it's worth it. Like, is it worth it? Is it going to be worth the sacrifice of consistency? And yes, and sometimes it will. Sometimes it definitely will be. Sorry, I kind of cut you off, Maria.
No, that was it. That was it.
I'm a purist. I'm a little bit of a purist here, but I do recognize that, yeah, for different roles, like a patient's going to look different maybe to a doctor versus a patient looking at themselves. That might look different.
Definitely different for a biller to a patient, for example.
Yes, exactly.
For a biller to a provider, rather.
Yes, awesome. Shelly, yes, the video we had to process it. We're going to edit it a little bit.
Take out the weirdness in the middle, please, of like me losing audio or whatever.
Maybe we'll take that out. But yeah, make sure to get OOUX.com/newsletter just to like, so you know when the link is coming out. We only send a newsletter like once, I don't know, maybe once a week. It also just, you can Sophia Prater on YouTube. It'll show up on YouTube. It's basically the only thing I ever post on YouTube is these recordings. So it'll be there too. Cool. All right. So we are 5 minutes over. So we're going to go ahead and close it up. Thank you, Maria. That was so awesome. Yes, no, it was very, very cool. I'll definitely be rewatching it. And I think for the next OOUX happy hour, I think that we're just going to do a social, actually. So that should be fun. We're going to do some breakout sessions and just talk to each other and hang out. And we have a little sip. So cheers, everybody. Happy OOUXing. And hopefully I'll see you next time. And maybe I'll see you in OOUX7.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.